Today's daf we're going to be learning is Chullin daf nun hey. We're going to get started from the sugya that we ended with yesterday, which is, or we were in the middle of, Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman said, Kisela ki yeter mi b'sela, and ki yisar ki yeter mi b'yisar. So the sela, we said it was a bit of a debate which case it was referring to, but obviously the yisar was referring to our Mishna, where it said nital, if it doesn't say the word nital, but if the gargeret is missing, the windpipe is missing a piece, it's up until an isar. And then he says, in an isar, once it gets to the size of an isar, that's already a problem, which means that ad until means up to and not including. Okay, now we're going to bring a slew of sources. Rava brought a slew of sources against Rav Nachman. The first one was this Mishna about, and I actually made a mistake in explaining the case, so I'm going to fix it. Okay, we talked about the ropes on the bed, that they would make their beds using ropes, and that would be, that they would put their mattress or straw or whatever they were sitting on top of, whatever they slept on top of the ropes. But what we're talking about here, my mistake, the ropes were already tied, okay? They were hanging off, okay? So there was extra hanging off the rope. So the rope is tied, and then the rope is longer. So now we have three sections. There's up until 5 tfachim. Now imagine you have a rope and it's tied on your bed, and then there's a little extra left over. You have nothing to do with something that's up until 5 tfachim. Okay, that's not going to get you anywhere. Then we have from 5 to 10. So because it's not going to get you anywhere, that part of the rope is not susceptible to impurity because it's not considered part of the bed and it's not considered useful in any way. If it's 5 to 10, already you can use it to tie something, okay? One of the sources I saw said, you could tie, I don't know if you want to try this, but the sheep or the lamb you're going to use for a Korban Pesach, you could tie around your bed, okay? So if you ever thought of a use for a rope near your bed, that would be a good one. So you could tie something around your bed, you could use it. It's already long enough to use. However, if it's beyond 10, okay, so then, and now at this point, the whole thing becomes not just the 5 to 10 part of the rope, but the whole thing, 0 to 10, is already being used because when you tie something, you're using the whole thing. If it's longer than 10, so the 0 to 10 part is actually useful, okay, but beyond 10, you really have no use for a rope that's longer than 10 tfachim. So the part of the rope that's beyond 10, it seems a bit of a strange thing, that part of the rope will be susceptible to impurity and part of it won't be, but that extra part is totally not. Okay, and that was the 0 to 5, 5 to 10, and 10 up. And then each time Rava quoted a part of it, he said, oh look, can't you tell that ad is up to and including 5 tfachim? Which it wasn't exactly clear why he thought that, to which each time Rav Nachman said, no, it's up to and not including. Okay, and that was how we ended that. Now we're going to do another tashma. Hadakin shebekli cheres, hem v'karkrotehem v'dafnotehen, yoshvin v'lo shalom masumachim. Okay, well, let's say you have a broken vessel. So you have a small earthenware vessel that broke, and now you have a shard of it. If the shard can sit up on its own, okay, without being supported by anything, then it's still considered a vessel as long as, okay, it could be teeny. So it has to be a certain size. What's the size? Shiurim, that again, what does that mean? It'll be considered a vessel and therefore be susceptible to impurity. Once it breaks and there's no use for it, then it's not susceptible to impurity. So the first thing is it has to stand on its own. The second is shiurim b'chdei sikat katan. The shear of how much needs to be able to be put in that vessel, that teeny broken piece that can now serve as a vessel because it could stand on its own, is the size of oil that you would need, okay, according to some commentaries, not the Rambam, but we'll explain it like some commentaries, you would need to be able to anoint the finger of a small child. Not enough, but hold enough oil that you could anoint the finger of a small child. Okay, it doesn't say the finger here, that's why it's open to interpretation. But if it was the whole body, it would be much larger than this. So anyway, the point is it's a small amount. The Rambam says it's actually the whole body, and then he has a bit of a different version of the Gemara because it doesn't really fit in with the sizes here. Anyway, this is the ad log. Here comes our shear. Until a log. What does that mean? If the vessel started out and was the size of a log, then the amount that it would need would be b'chdei sikat katan. Now, what does it mean if the vessel was up to a log? Up to and including or up to non-including? My lav log kilamata. So Rava says, does it not mean up to and including a log? And that will be the shear that if it got down to the small size and broke and was now only right, could fit a small, enough to anoint the finger of a small child, then that would be susceptible to impurity. Okay, that's what he thinks. To which Rav Nachman responds, log kilamala. No, you could say log is like kimala, lamala, meaning up until a log, but not including a log, it's the first category. Once you get to a log, we're going to go into the next category, which is the next line, the Mishnah. Tashma mi log va'ad se'ah b'revi'it. If the vessel originally fit anywhere between one log and a se'ah, which is 24 log. Okay, so anywhere from 1 to 24 log, what size does the vessel need to be now? Something that can hold a revi'it, a quarter of a log. Okay, a quarter of a log, that's the basic shiur in general for drinking, right? Like kezayit is for food, revi'it is for drinking. So once it's a regular sized vessel, which is anywhere from a log and up, or up to a se'ah, is revi'it. So now that he's going to say again, Rava, we know what he's going to say. My lav se'ah kilamata, doesn't it mean a log until a se'ah, meaning up to and including the se'ah. And then against Rav Nachman, who said up to is up to and not including. Lo, se'ah kilamala. No, you could say the se'ah is already the next level. Okay, what's the next level? Last part of this Mishnah. Tashma mi se'ah v'ad sa'atayim b'chatzi log. If the vessel, though, was from a se'ah, 24 log to 24 log, then how much would you need in the vessel to still make it a vessel? Chatzi log. Okay, it's obvious the logic here, right? The bigger the vessel, the bigger your broken piece needs to be. Otherwise, it's really not the same vessel at all, and it's not really. You could have said otherwise, but the theory is, if it was a very big vessel, then the broken piece has to be bigger, relative to its original size. Okay, so fine, we're done now. We think we're done anyway. Rava brought all these difficulties from these two Mishnayot, right? Different lines of each of those Mishnayot, claiming it was Ava Bichlal. Rav Nachman said each time, no, it's up to it and not including. Okay, and resolved. However, Vaha Tanya, well, wait. There's a braita on the second Mishnah that we brought about the log that says, log kilamata, se'ah kilamata, sa'atayim kilamata. It says the log is up to and including a log. It's treated like the lesser shiur. And the se'ah is treated like the lesser amount, right? That each one of these cases, the braita says about our Mishnah, it's up to and including. And maybe that's why Rava was throwing these at Rav Nachman in the first place, right? Maybe that's why he was pretty convinced, because maybe he knew this braita. Not sure, because we didn't really know why Rava was so convinced that it was this way. But in fact, the braita goes like Rava. But we have an answer. What's the answer? Hatam lechumra. Ta'amar Rabbi Avau, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, kol shiurei chachamim lahachmil, chutz mikigrish shel ktamim lahakel. Why is that log kilamata, se'ah kilamata, sa'atayim kilamata? Because, okay, let's start with the first statement of the. We'll skip the hatam lechumra. We'll explain in a minute. Rabbi Avau said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that all the requisite amounts the rabbis gave us are always to be stringent with them. Meaning, when you get a requisite amount and there's some sort of issue, should we go this way, should we go that way, which in our issue is it up to and including or up to and non-including? We're always ruling stringently. Okay? Except for one case. What's the case? It's the grease of ktamim lahakel. Okay, ktamim is a whole interesting issue. We're going to get to it in niddah, but a ketem is when you see a spot on your underwear. So the question is, now there, from the world of tum and tara, you're usually ktamim are issues. Okay? But in niddah, there's two issues, and the tum and tara issue is no longer relevant. The issue, right, the tum and tara meaning, can you go into the temple and things like that. For those purposes, ktamim are issues. For relations with husband and wife, they're actually not. But since it was an issue for tum and tara in the temple, they made a gzerah that we're going to also say it's an issue for relations with husband and wife. So now we're going to be lenient, though, because that whole thing is just a chumrah. Because it's all a stringency, we can actually be lenient with the details. And therefore, there's a certain amount, this is a bit of a strange thing for nowadays to think about, but in days where people didn't wear underwear and they just wore these robes or long cloaks, and then they would sit down on the ground, and what if they sat on a bug? And the bug, there were these lice bugs that people would sit on and blood came out. So they made an amount that they said, if it's a ketem, and it's up to this amount, you can assume it came from that, right? We had this whole thing recently about tolling. We assume that it came from somewhere else, if we can have somewhere else to kind of attach to. And then the amount would be, the amount of blood that would make was the size of a grease, okay? And then they say, I grease includes the grease, because there, is the one case we're going to be lenient, okay? Until and including a grease, we're going to be lenient. Okay, that one is the one case we're going to be lenient when it comes to shiurim, because that whole thing is only rabbinic. But in general, we're machmir. How does that work here? So now go back. Hatam lechumra. All the cases Rava brought, okay, or the Braita that said, lo kilamata, se'ah kilamata, satan kilamata, that's all to rule stringently. Because if your thing was up to a log, and let's say it was exactly a log, if we're going to be stringent, we're going to say it's kilamata. We're going to say it's a smaller vessel, because now the vessel is really teeny and it can only hold enough to anoint a child's finger, but not a quarter log, we're actually going to say it's still susceptible to impurity. That's going to be a stringency. What was Rav Nachman talking about? When he said up to and not including, that was also a stringency, because he said up to an isar, it's not a problem. Add an isar, it's already a problem. That's a stringency. So up to and including or up to and not including is really going to depend on the context, whether you're going l'chumra or l'kula. You're always going to take it l'chumra. You're always going to be more stringent when it says ad. Okay, so that could be sometimes up to and including, sometimes not up to and not including, and we're going to prove this right now if we're going back to the first Mishnah. Daikanami dikatane ala dahi. We can prove this because of a Braita on the first Mishnah. If you remember, the first Mishnah said up to 5, right? It's not susceptible to impurity. 5 to 10, susceptible to impurity. 10 and up, not susceptible to impurity. Now, if you're going to be strict, what are you going to say? Up to 5 means up to and not including 5. 5 to 10 is going to include both 5 and 10, right? Because you want to get the maximum amount that's going to actually create a case where the rope is susceptible to impurity. Because as soon as you get to 10 and up, or let's say beyond 10, you're going to already say, oh, right, 10 is going to, right, it's already not susceptible to impurity. So 5 to 10 is going to be the most inclusive, right? If you go l'chumra, you're going to say 5 including 5, and up to, 5 is not in the first one, right? Because up to and not including 5 is already a problem, is susceptible to impurity. And from 5 up to and including also 10. Okay, and that's exactly what this Braita says. Chamisha kilamala, asara kilamata. Okay, the 5 is like the next section. 5 is like 5 plus, and 10 is like 10 minus, right? Minus 10. So that shows you that in the same sentence, we can say up to and not including, and up to and including. Okay, depending on what we want to get to, which is to the more stringent position. Okay, finished with that. Now we're going to talk about the spleen. The next case in the Mishnah is nital hatchol. I'm a Rav Meir mishmei de Rava. Okay, remember that Rav Meir says this. We're going to come back to him. Okay, each time we're going to have a Mishnah, a line in the Mishnah. The next one's going to be about the klayot, about the kidneys. And then someone's going to come and say, even though this is in the list of kosher ones, there's actually cases where it's not kosher. Okay, where it's a treifa. So the first one is Rav Meir in the name of Rava, who says, Lo shanu ela nital. Notice it says, if the spleen is removed. However, aval nikev, if it made a perforation, and if there was a tear in the tol, it would be a treifa. So Matav Rabbi Yossi bar Avin. Rabbi Yossi bar Avin comes with a difficulty, and he says, or V'itema Rabbi Yossi bar Zvida, or maybe Rabbi Yossi bar Zvida says, he's going to make an inference from a Tanaitic source. Chotech me'ubar shebeme'eha, mutar ba'achila. Okay, this is a sugya we're going to see in a little while, but there's a concept here. Okay, this is a strange concept, but if you have an animal that's pregnant, and you slaughter that animal, everything inside the animal, all of its flesh, and also the fetus that's inside the animal, the fetus is considered part of the mother's body, and therefore the fetus, even though the fetus could, let's say, be alive when the animal's slaughtered, the fetus could still be alive. That fetus can be eaten without shchita because it was already permitted by the shchita of the mother. There's actually a big machloket about this. We'll get to all the details, but that's called a ben pikuah. Now, if before you slaughter the mother, you cut a piece of one of the limbs of the animal, of the fetus, off, but you left it inside the animal. Okay, now normally you cut a limb from a live animal, it's called Ever min achai, and it's forbidden to eat. But because you left this limb inside the body still, it was detached from the fetus, but it was still in the mother's womb, so when the mother is slaughtered, that meat is actually permitted to eat. It's not Ever min achai. Okay, that's not really important for our purposes, but the next line is, now, we're forgetting about the fetus now. You have an animal that you slaughtered. If you cut minat chol u'minat klayot, asur ba'achila. If you cut a piece off of the tchol or the klayot of the animal, though, before you slaughtered it, well, that's forbidden because that's ever min achai, right? Even though you took a part of it, right? You took a part of it off, that's a problem, okay? Even though you didn't, right? 1 second. Im nechtach. Right. So, sorry. Rashi says here, you have min atchol u'min haklayot, you cut it, even though you didn't take the whole thing out, it's forbidden. Still, it's forbidden because of ever min achai. Okay, even though you hadn't removed it from the animal before the slaughter. Okay, now, what does this have to do with our purposes? Well, it says if you cut from the tchol or the klayot, okay, that piece that you cut off, that you left in the animal, but it was completely severed, would be forbidden to eat. What can you infer from this? Well, now you have an animal that has a tchol and a klayah that are cut off, right? So, ha behema gufa sharia. It sounds like you could still eat the animal, right? Because they're just saying you can't eat that piece that you cut off, but you can eat the rest of the animal. It's not a treifa. Now, why isn't it a treifa? If you cut the tchol, now you have to make a comparison here. Rav Meir said if nikev hatchol, if it had a hole in it, a perforation. Now, what bigger perforation is it than it being cut? It's like a huge perforation. So you can't say it's a treifa if from here you can infer that it's actually kosher. So they say, well, 2 possible answers. Who adin dafilu behemanami asira? Who said that the animal's kosher? Okay, maybe the animal's also forbidden. They were just focusing on what? What is ever min achai? An ubar with the parts still in the animal, that's not ever min achai. But if you cut part of the animal and leave it inside, that's actually ever min achai. Okay, and what they wanted to talk about was I did tani reisha mutar b'achila, because they said the fetus is still permitted to eat, even that piece that you cut off. Tana nami seifa asur b'achila. That's why they said in the second part. But the tchol, if you cut it off, you can't eat the tchol. You also can't eat the whole animal, okay? But that just wasn't the topic. They were trying to say, let's compare the ubar to the tchol. And then you can't infer anything, and then there's no contradiction. Alternatively, ibait ema nikev lechu v'nechtach lechud. Maybe you would distinguish and say a perforation is not the same as cut. Even though you would think what bigger perforation is there than cutting, maybe they're 2 separate things. Now, why would they be 2 separate things? Good question. The Bahag gives an explanation that, in my mind, requires some thinking about. The Bahag says that nikev is not by human action. And a cut, right, here someone came and cut it. So a human action wouldn't necessarily make it a treifa. Now, why that is, I don't know. But it's an interesting distinction. He says that's the difference. Nikev is it just kind of happens to the animal, sort of in a natural, God-driven way. As opposed to this where human action did it, and maybe that makes it less severe. Why it would be less severe is a good question. Later we're going to see a sugya where it's the opposite, but it's not really a comparable sugya, so we'll see then. Okay, so what do we have here? Nital atchol. Rav Meir said, but not nikev. Nikev is going to be a treifa, but right then we kind of had a question on that, but resolved the difficulty. Nitlu haklayot. The next case is the kidneys are removed. Okay, now we're going to go look at some pictures. Okay, some of these are a little bit graphic, some of them are okay. Graphic, but they're, this one's a little gross looking. But anyway, we have a picture of a kidney here. You see this white stuff. Okay, this is going to come up right now. The white stuff is basically, and this is why I wanted to show you the picture, because you can understand now, the white part, because otherwise it's not clear when they're going to talk about the white part. The white part is really the part that connects to the rest of the body. Okay, so here I'm just going to show you, like here's a place of where the klayot sit in the body, and the white part basically connects, that's in picture 118, and the white part connects the kidneys to the body. Okay, so now, nitzlu klayot, we said, is totally not a problem, even if you completely remove the kidneys. But again, just like the previous, Amarachish bar Papa, Mishmei de Rav, lakta b'chulia achat trefa. Rachish bar Papa says, if there's a disease in the kidneys, it's a problem. Amrei b'ma'arava, now in Israel they said, v'hu demaite lakuta limkom charitz. That's if the lakuta is if the sickness is in the place of the charitz, to which the Gemara says, we're at the top of Amabet now, v'heicha mekom charitz, l'chivara detute matne. It's in the white part that's under the loins. That's this white part. In other words, the kidney itself can be diseased. We're not worried about that. We're worried about specifically where it connects and basically gets its nutrients from the body. It gets everything goes through there. So that's the critical part. Okay? Amar Rabbi Nachman. Shaltinu, here's another picture, by the way. Here they sliced open a kidney, if it interests you, and there's the white part. You see it on both sides because they opened it up. But that's the white part of the kidney. Okay. Now, we're going to stop our pictures for a minute. Okay. Now that Amar Rabbi Nachman. Shaltinu lechule trofai de ma'arav. I asked all the experts of trefas in Israel, va'amruli, and they told me, hilchata kerachish bar papa v'leit hilchata kerava vira. Okay, now that's why I wanted you to remember Rav Vira. We had these two Mishnayot. Both said, take out the spleen, no problem. Take out the kidneys, no problem. Rav Vira came and said, but if you have a hole in the spleen, it's a problem. Rachish bar papa said, if you have a disease in the kidneys, it's a problem. So now the guys in the field basically testify that we don't actually hold by Rav Vira. If you have a tear in the spleen, it's not a problem. But if you have a disease in the kidneys, it is a treifa. Okay, and then they're going to say, Lo Amaran, now this halacha that we don't hold like Rav Vira, okay, now we're going to have we have to actually go back in the pictures because they ordered this a little differently. They ordered this in the order of the Mishna, even though the discussion of the toll came up only here. But here's the toll, by the way. Okay, here's a picture where they show where the toll sits. Now they say the following. Lo Amaran ela bekulshe, abba besumche treifa. Now when we say we don't hold like Rav Vira, by the way, there's 3 words here in parentheses that I skip because most of the Girsot don't have it. It doesn't really make much sense because it's not the Rav Vira. It's the fact that we don't hold like Rav Vira. We don't hold by him in the kulshe. The kulshe is the thin part. It's a little hard to tell in this picture. But the sumche, they say here, is where it connects to the body. That's why it's probably somche, like samuch, next to. But it's the important part here is the sumche is very thick, okay, and the kulshe is very thin. Okay, you can see it in this next picture as well. I'm in 115 and now 116. The kulshe, again, it's not so clear, but the kulshe you can see is pretty flat here. The sumche is big, fluffy, right? It's rounded and it's much wider. So they say we don't hold like him in the kulshe part if there's some problem. But besumche, if there's an issue in the sumche, it's actually a treifa. However, if you're missing part of it or it's perforated, as long as you have an area of the sumche that's still the thickness of a coin, of a gold dinar coin, then it's kshera. Okay? So that's what we say about Rav Vira. So in the end, we don't really hold like him. It's not really disqualified, but there is some sort of disqualification if the sumche is missing and it doesn't even have a thickness of a dinar zahav, and that's the thick part, so it would have to be a lot to be missing, then it's going to be a treifa. Amrei b'mar Rava. Now they say another statement in Eretz Yisrael, which also we're going to take issue with. They made a principle. They said, listen, whatever is disqualified in a lung, okay, we saw there were tons of disqualifications in the lungs, and the kuliyah, the kidney, you can even not have a kidney and it's fine. So not have any kidney and it's going to be okay. So kol pasel bere'ah, if it's kosher in a lung, if it's disqualified in the lung, it's going to be kasher bekuliyah. Okay, any of that long list of treifas in a re'ah is not a problem in the lung, in the kidney, Any of them is not a problem. How do we know this? And they make this big jump. Because a perforation in the lung is a problem, therefore, and it's not a problem in a kidney, because there's definitely no problem of some perforation in the kidney, therefore, any disqualification in the lung is going to be fine in a kidney. Now, here comes a jump. This is not the rabbis in Israel talking anymore. There's the Gemara. And the Gemara says, I would go even the other way, which is, and all the more so, this sounds like an exercise in logic, right? All these, the converse and the inverse, and right, let's make all these assumptions. If it's kosher in the lung, then it's definitely going to be kosher in the kidney, right? That makes sense, the kosher came. Because if something that's disqualified in the lung is kosher in the kidney, then something that's kosher in the lung is definitely going to be kosher in the kidney. Rabbi Tanchuma. Rabbi Tanchuma says, what are you talking about? Okay, now, what Rabbi Tanchuma seems at first to be disagreeing with is the second part. What's kosher in the lung, it's kosher in the lung is kosher in the kidney. Now, what does he say? Uklalahu, this is a rule. I have a case where it's just not true. V'harei mugla, okay, if you have a pussy cyst, dikasher bere'ah, we learned already that a kosher cyst, remember they had those bigger ones, the tinare, and there were all these big cysts that have pus in them, it's not a problem. Kasher bere'ah, and yet pasul b'chuliyah, because that's lakta b'chuliyah, that's diseased. Okay? So in a kidney, that's a problem, even though it's not a problem in the lung. So that disagrees with the second part of what you said. Whatever's kasher in a lung is going to be kosher in a kidney. That's not true. And here's the second one. Varemayim zakim. Okay, if the cyst is full of clear water, dik sherim hacha v'hacha. It's kosher both here and both there. Okay. Rashi says, Lo yadana mai kushya. I don't know what the difficulty is with the second part. It doesn't really seem to be a difficulty. It's just saying what's kosher here is kosher there. That doesn't seem to disagree with any statement that they made. However, the Ramban has a creative interpretation, which actually makes it a difficulty on the first statement, on what the rabbis in Israel actually said. So let's just see what they said, and then we'll show you. The rabbis in Israel said anything disqualified in the lung is actually fine in the kidney. Now, the mayim zakim are ksherim hacha v'hacha. However, mayim that's actually bad water, okay, or cloudy water, which we're going to see soon, is a problem in both. So what the Ramban says is that this statement meant clear water is fine in both, but muddy water or bad water is bad in both of them. And what do you see here? What's pasul in the re'ah is actually pasul in the kiliyah, and that disagrees with what they said, because they said what's pasul in the lung is actually kasher in the kidney. There's no pasul that's in both, and this is in both. So that's a good explanation, a good possible way to read this Gemara. Okay, either which way, it at least disagrees with the second statement, which the Gemara inferred from the statement of the rabbis in Israel, and possibly disagrees with the first. And certainly Rav Achi's response is going to say they're completely wrong, what they said in Israel. Ela amar Rav Ashi, treifo kamadamet lahadade? Okay, after Rabbi Tanchuma asked this question, comes Rav Ashi and explains, and he says, how can you possibly compare treifo? We've had this line before, which is, right, you can't compare the way a perforation in one place is like a perforation in another place, or anything from one to the other. Because you could cut it in one place and it'll die, and you cut it in a different place and it'll live. And it really depends on that exact place in the body. And there's no real logic to it. I mean, there's obviously a logic, but there's right there we had this case where it was, the case they brought, they didn't actually bring it in that, but the one they're referring to here is when the top of the leg, a cut there actually doesn't cause a problem, when the bottom of the leg does, when logic would say it would be the reverse. So you can't compare treifo like that. So therefore, he doesn't like the principle that the rabbis in Israel brought. Now they just point out, umayim zakim ksherim lo maran ela detzile. When we say that mayim ksherim inside this abscess is kosher, it's only if they're clear waters. Aval achire treifa. But if it's fluids that are muddled, in clouded waters, it's not going to be good. And when we say it's clear liquids, clear fluids here, it's only if they're not rotted or, disgusting, like gone sour. But if it's sarich, it's already going to be a treifa. Okay, so it could be clear but ruined waters. So if ruined in any way, the water's bad, that's going to, the fluids inside are bad, that's going to be a problem. Hakuliyah shiktina, if a kuliyah got smaller, like shrunk, okay, the kidney shrunk, there's another psul. Bidaka ad kifol, bigasa ad ka'anava benonit. If it's a small one, then, like a small animal, then it's the size of a bean. Okay, once it's the size of a bean, it's no good. Bigasan, a large animal, till the size of an average size grape. Okay, go figure what an average size grape is, but okay. Next, nita lechia tachton. Okay, so the next case in the Mishna was if you took out if the jawbone was detached, was taken out. I'm a Rabbi Zera, and then that's not a treifa. So Rabbi Zera says, "L'shanu ela shechola lechiota yedei li'ita v'hamra'a." That's only if the animal can survive. If they don't have a jawbone, they're not going to be able to chew. So, and chew their own food. So it's only if someone could actually force feed them, right? If they could be fed by humans, pushing food down their throat, then, right, don't think of like IV. If there's some other way to get fluids, and nutrition in their body, but here we're talking about through the mouth, not IV, but, it's just kind of an external way of eating, then it would work. If you can't shove food down their throat and they can eat it, then it's a treifa, because obviously it can't survive without food. Okay, if the womb is removed, it's not a problem. Now they just bring a braita. Hi aim, hi tarpachat, hi shalpuchit. They just give you three terms that all mean the same thing. You wonder why they don't just use the word rechem, okay, but instead, which is the word for womb, but instead they use aim, right, like mother, makes sense, that's the mothering part of the body, tarpachat and shalpuchit, okay? Those are all the same thing. Now we're going to deal with, for the rest of the stuff, the charuta and the geludah, which are mentioned in this Mishna, if you remember. They're also part of the bazgal, if you remember. Okay, charuta bidei shamayim kshera. Okay, so this is if the lung shrinks on account of something that God sent. Okay, this is why I said before that dafka what came from God before was actually problematic. This time it's actually better. Okay, but you have to think about the differences. Anyway, not for now. Tanu Rabbanan eziu charuta kosher nitzamka re'ah shela bidei shamayim kshera bidei adam trefa. Okay, so if it's, let's say, thunder and lightning that caused the animal to go into a bit of a panic and their lungs shrunk, it's fine. If it's bidei adam, and a person scared them, it's not fine. Now we're going to see the difference here is going to clearly be because the assumption was, for some reason, that if the fear is from something natural, then it's going to heal. If it's from a human, then it's not going to heal. Okay, and we'll see that later because we're going to have a test. How do you figure out? Because you have no idea what scared the animal, okay? Unless you saw it. But if you didn't see it, right, and even if you saw it, you wouldn't know that caused the animal's lung to shrink because you're not looking at the lung at the time you see the animal get scared. Anyway, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, af bidei kol habriot. Also, if it's from any other creature, like an animal scared it, same thing. Okay, now same thing. What we had two lines in the braita here. One was bidei shamayim kshera, and also from an animal, or bidei adam trefa, and also from an animal. So that's the Gemara's question. Ibailu Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar areshakai ulakula. Is it talking about the first part where it's kosher and it's being lenient, and even an animal scared it would also be kosher? Or aseifakai ulachumra, or is it talking about the second line saying, or bidei adam is no good and neither is an animal if it was scared by an animal? So let's learn from here. Tashma. D'Tanya charuta bidei adam trefa. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar omer af bidei kol habriot. Now notice here the only thing mentioned is the trefa case, and then it says even other animals, so it must be referring to if animals scared it or humans scared it. Right? Anything that's not from God is going to be a problem. Rabbi Bar Chana have a ka'aza b'midbara. He was in the desert. Eshkachanu dichre ditzamik re'aditu. He found some rams that had lungs that had shriveled. Right, and he had slaughtered them, and he saw the shriveled lungs. At Tashal Beit Midrash, he went to the Beit Midrash. I don't know, he was in the desert. I don't know if there was Beit Midrash there, but I guess he brought them back. Amruleh, they said to him, this is what you do to test it. Okay, or maybe he asked them later, because it's interesting. The test they're going to give is, well, it depends if it's the summer or the winter. So it could be he didn't eat it, and when he got back later to the Beit Midrash, he asked them the question, and then they said, listen, this is the test. Okay, so you know for next time. Now, the main thing you have to realize is what they want you to do is soak it in tepid water. So to get tepid water in the summer and the winter is going to be different. So you're going to basically use a different vessel, because it all depends on, is the vessel going to keep the cold in or not? Okay, is it going to let it get hot? Like in the summer, you want to avoid heat. So in the summer, you're going to use, bekaita is the summer. Aite, right, tet and sadi are switch, so it's bekaita in the summer. Aite mishichle chivare, take white earthenware vessels, because white earthenware vessels will keep it colder. Okay, if you use dark, it's going to attract the sun. Umalinu maya kurire, put cold water in, because cold water soon in the summer is going to get tepid. Va'anchinu me'ed la'ed, and leave it soaking there for 24 hours. Ihadram baryan, if it gets better and it goes back to not being shriveled, bidei shamayim you know it's bidei shamayim ukshera. That's the way you're able to tell if it would have healed had the animal still been alive. V'ilo, treifa, and if not, it's a treifa. Besitva, which sounds like the stav, which is the fall, but sitva in Aramaic is actually the winter. In the winter, when it's really cold, and you don't want it to be freezing the water, take dark vessels, so it absorbs whatever heat there is, and put tepid waters in, and put it, you leave it for 24 hours, again, okay, if it comes back, then it's fine, if not, it's a problem. Okay, geludah. Now we get to geludah. Geludah is it's missing its hide. Okay, we're going to have some pictures soon. But first, Tanu Rabbanan, geludah Rabbi Meir machshir b'chachamim poslin, which is exactly what we saw in our Mishna. There's a machloka between Rabbi Meir and the rabbis. Ukvar he'id Elazar Safra v'Yochanan ben Gudgada. But now in this braita we have more detail. These two rabbis already testified al hagludah shepsula, that it's actually disqualified. Okay, we don't hold like Rabbi Meir that it's okay. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar chazal bo Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar adds, and this is going to be a big question. Shimon ben Elazar adds that Rabbi Meir himself changed his mind and agreed with the rabbis that it's no good. Michlal de Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar palig Rabbi Meir begludah. Right now, isn't it obvious? But yeah, it's pretty clear from here that he thinks they disagreed. And then just at some point, Rabbi Meir changed his mind, because you can't change your mind if you didn't disagree. Okay, that seems pretty simple, but what's the problem? Look at this braita. V'hatanya, it says in the Tosefta, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar lo nechleku Rabbi Meir v'chachamim ala geludah shepsula. They don't disagree about geludah. They both agree that geludah is psula. So it sounds like he doesn't think there's a machloket. So how could he say Rabbi Meir changed his mind when Rabbi Meir didn't ever think that? Okay, but let's just finish the Tosefta and then we'll get to the answer. Ukvar I Rabbi Yoshaya benosha Rabbi Yehuda Abasan lefnei Rabbi Akiva mishum Rabbi Tarfon. Okay, we have a testimony about someone. Going back to Rabbi Tarfon, ala geludah shepsula. Okay, he testified that geludah is disqualified if it's missing the hide. Ve'im nishtayer bo kesela kshera. But as long as it has a size of a sela, it's kshera. Okay, this isn't relevant right now to our purposes. All we're trying to show is Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar in this Tosefta says that they didn't disagree. Okay, but we're going to get back to that line in a minute because they're going to say, oh, let's talk about that line and let's understand it better. Anyway, we'll get back there in a minute. So, Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, my lo nechleku, lo amar Rabbi Meir b'machlokto. What does it mean, lo nechleku? It means that Rabbi Meir didn't stand to his position all the way, meaning he changed his mind. Okay, when Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar said they didn't disagree, what he meant is they didn't disagree, they disagreed at some point. At a later point, they didn't disagree, and then it fits perfectly with what Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar said. So that's a pretty easy answer. Okay, now we're going to get to all these details about geludah, and I'm going to put the pictures up again. We're going to see the pictures. Okay, so here we have an animal. Okay, you can see it's all red. It's missing its hide. Okay, only where there's some white, that's where hide is. Okay, we're going to talk about that. Actually, some of the white, no, but this gray part, okay, is going to, and with the black on it, that's where there's hide. We're going to talk about this soon. Amar, im nishtayar bo kesela kshera. Heicha. Where does it need a sela remaining? Okay, which part of the animal? So they say here, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, apenei hashidra kula. So the first opinion is, all right on the shidra, on the spine. Ibayeluhu de'arich v'katan d'chim mitzaref havelek sela. Okay, what if it's long? Now, sela is a round circle. Okay, we're going to see like here. Here you have these round circles. Okay, what if it's long across the whole length? Okay, but it's narrow, so it's not the thickness of a sela. Do we say d'chim mitzaref lahavei kasela? We've said this before. If you were put them all together, that whole area, it would fill the area, right? It would be the area of a sela, not that it needs to be the size of a sela. O dilma berochav sela al panei hashidra kula, and that's this picture 124. And that's why these black circles here, okay, they made it like, here's a sela. Let's say you have this whole strip and the thickness of it is specifically a sela, okay, the size of this coin. Tashma, let's learn it from here. The parish Rabbeinu Horai Mishmei Shmuel berochav sela panei kol hashidra kula. Okay, so he says explicitly, Rabbi Barchana said, Rabbeinu Horai says in the name of Shmuel, you need a sela across the whole length of the strip has to be a sela. Okay, meaning in order for us to say this isn't a geludah, you need to have a strip along the spine that's a sela thick. Rabbi Barchana Amar Rashi Prakim. Okay, he says the Rashi Prakim. Now here you see all these black spots around on this picture 124. Okay, Rashi says there's a lot of differences of opinion. Some b'chol parkei chulioteha va'atzmot hashok va'yarech b'inan shiur kasela. In other words, by the bones of the thigh, of the lower thigh, all these different parts. Okay, what exactly it means? The different parts, like by the shoulder, different kind of edges of the animal need to have a piece of hide there. Okay, that's Rashi Prakim. Rabbi Elazar ben Antigonus Mishum Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yanai Amar Makom Tiburo. Okay, Makom Tiburo is the stomach. You can see that in picture 123 at the bottom there, the bottom part of the animal facing the floor. Okay, that's Makom Tiburo. So we have this machloket about where the hide needs to be in order for it to not be a problem. Okay, it seems like any hide just in one spot that's the size of a sela isn't going to work. It has to be in one of these more key places. By Rabbi Yanai Rabbi Yishmael, Nital Makom Shidra Kula, Vikulo Kayam. Okay, what if, okay, now here, let's go to picture number 125. What if you're specifically missing in those key places? Okay? You're missing specifically, there's no hide in the shidra, but there's hide everywhere else. Or nital makom tiburo, or the part where the stomach is completely missing, but the rest of the hide is intact. Nitulu rashi prakim, or all these spots that we talked about before, that it's missing there. Vikulo kayam mai. What's the halacha? In other words, if we talked about those as being the key areas where a little bit of hide there is going to save the animal from being a treifa, what if you don't have the hide in those key areas? Does that make the animal a treifa? And we're left with a teiku. We don't have an answer. Okay. Amarav. Kola or kulo matzil bigludah. Okay, he says, to answer this question, right, he kind of says that we have this approach that any hide anywhere on the body can save from geludah. Okay, again, it has to be the size of a sela, but yes. Once it's the size of a sela anywhere on the body, other than or beit hapraso. That's by the hooves. Okay, we saw in the picture before, I'm not going to share my screen, but the bottom of the hooves, if you have some hide there, that's not going to help you. But every other hide of the body is fine, as long as there's a sela. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, afilu or beit hapraso nami matzil. He thinks even the skin by the hooves is going to be fine, can save your animal from being a treifa. Okay, we'll see in a minute what the issue with the hooves are. Ba'amine Rabbi Asi and Rabbi Yochanan. So Rabbi Asi asked Rabbi Yochanan, or beit hapraso ma'u sheyatzil begludah. Okay, does this help? Now, he just answered it does, but that's because we heard it before, but he asked him the question, Amar le matzil. He says, yes, it does, and the reason why we're bringing this, even though we knew this answer already, is because of the continued conversation. Amarle, limaditani rabbeinu, but didn't you teach us this Mishna? Elu she'orotehen kivsaran. Okay, now, in a different issue, Tuma, we're back to Tuma. We started with Tuma, we're ending with Tuma. Meat or flesh of an animal is food, theoretically. So it's susceptible to impurity once the animal's dead. But the hide is not, because it's not edible. In order for something to be susceptible to purity, it has to be edible or usable, right? Or, all sorts of things. So the hide in and of itself is not usable. Okay, if you made it into a leather cover, it's a different story. But right now it's just hide. It's not susceptible to impurity. However, there's some hides that are like flesh. Okay? So if they're like flesh, now here's going to be the connection. For purity purposes, they're going to be susceptible to impurity. For our purposes, they're not going to save you from geludah because they're not really considered hide. Okay? They're considered flesh. Got it? So then it's as if there's just flesh and no hide. So you said that or beit hapraso is like flesh, which means, how can you say that or beit hapraso saves you from geludah because now you have some hide there when you don't even think that's hide? Now, he says, so you taught us Elu shotorem kivsaran or beit hapraso. So Amarle, Rabbi Yochanan says to him, when I taught you that it was a unique opinion, but it's not the mainstream opinion. Okay? And that's how I can say this. Now, how do I know this? Because we're going to see this braita. Ditanya. Hashochet ta'olah. Okay, we're back to pigul. Remember what pigul is? You have an intent while you're slaughtering the animal that you're going to sprinkle the blood beyond its designated time, beyond its designated place. If it's beyond the time, it's going to be pigul with karet. If it's beyond the designated place, you're going to do it outside the temple. Then it's pigul without karet. Okay, it's forbidden. You can't eat it, but you're not going to get karet for eating it. Now, this is only going to be about meat and not about hide, because the hide doesn't get burned on the altar or anything. So if you have this thought that you're going to burn something on the altar, I said about sprinkle the blood, but let's take it to, while you're slaughtering or while you're sprinkling the blood, you have a thought that you're going to burn something outside its designated time or place, it's only going to be things that are burnt, which is the meat and not the hide. So now the question is, what's considered hide, what's considered meat? And we're going to see that unique opinion. Tanya. First, we're going to see the mainstream opinion. Hashochet ta'olah. So you're slaughtering an olah laktir with the intent you're going to burn kizayit from the or, which wouldn't be karet unless it's meat, beyond its designated time or its place. Okay, we're going to see. Now, which or? Of tachat ha'aliyah. This hide that's underneath the tail. Chutzlim kamo pasul ve'embo karet. Chutzlim mano pigul v'chayavim alav karet. This is pigul because specifically under the tail, the hide there is edible. It's very soft because it's under the tail and it's like flesh. Elazar ben Yehuda, here comes the unique opinion. Ish ivlim, amar mishum Rabbi Yaakov. V'chener Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda ish ikum, omer mishum Rabbi Shimon. Okay, so we have two people passing on a tradition, one of Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, one of Rabbi Shimon. So it's not a unique opinion, it's unique by two people, okay, but it's not the mainstream. They say, or echad or beit hapraso, which is our case. It's also the or of the beit hapraso. is going to be considered like meat, and that's what we're going to see. This is only a unique opinion. Okay, or beta praso echad or harosh shel egel harach. Okay, the or on the head of a small calf. Echad or shel tachat al yad, the one under the tail. V'kol shamanu chachamim gabei tuma, and any other place where the rabbi said this is tameh. Elu sharotehen kivsaran, the whole list that the rabbi said. Lavi or beit haboshet, which what does that include that they said, and anything else? Oh, also by the womb. Chutz, this, by the way, is another word for womb. I don't know why they didn't bring this earlier, but beit haboshet, like embarrassing, right? That's why they call it the womb. It's interesting. Anyway, the point being, right, that's pigul because that's considered meat. So what do you see? Only according to this unique opinion is it considered meat. So Rabbi Yochanan says, when I said that, I was saying it was this unique opinion. I wasn't saying that's the standard opinion. Standard opinion is it's not, it's actually or, and that's why the or can save an animal when it's geludah. Okay, with that we finished. Now we're going to do a quick review. We started with the shear of a bowl, right? The whole thing was to get to, right, when it's broken and all that. The whole thing was Rava asking all these difficulties on Rav Nachman, who said ad is up to and not including. In the end, we concluded that it's sometimes this, sometimes that, and it all just goes to chumrah, and that's how we resolved Rav Nachman, because Rav Nachman in our Mishna was being stringent by saying it doesn't include the isar. As soon as you get to an isar, it's already a treifa. Then we got to the tchol and the klayot, that both, if they're removed, are not a problem, but Rabbi Meir said the tchol that is perforated is a problem, and Rachish Bar Papa said if the kidney is diseased, specifically in the white part where it connects with the body, right? And then we had the whole thing that we don't really hold by Rabbi Avira, but we do specifically in the sumche. By the way, the sumche was also, I forgot to mention this, I said that it was where it connects with the body. That's also why the sumche is more stringent, because that's where wherever it connects with the body, that's where the connection to the body comes from, and the life of the item comes. And we said as long as there's a little bit of it left, though, there, it's still fine. Then we got to the principle of the Chachmei Eretz Yisrael, which, whatever's pasul in the re'ah is kosher in the kiliyah, and whatever's kosher in there is kosher there. And we said, no, we can't make rules like that. It doesn't work. Then we had the nital lechia tachton, as long as you could force feed it. We had the aim shalam. We just said all these words for rechem, which, again, at the end of the daf, we had a fourth word. Then we talked about charuta, and we talked about geludah. Okay, in charuta, we differentiated bidei shamayim, bidei adam, and bidei be'ema is like bidei adam. And in geludah, we basically had this machloket, but then said that Rabbi Meir ends up agreeing with the rabbis. We checked that out. Was that really true, right? Rabbi Shimon Elazar really said that? Yes, he did. Okay, we figured that out. And then, because we quoted this bright with Rabbi Shimon Elazar, it had this other statement in the name of Rabbi Tarfon that if it has a sela, it's ksheran, and we had a whole big debate about where the sela has to be left, and how, and where it appears, and what part of the hide has to be left, and we had a whole discussion about that. And with that, we finished for today. Wishing everyone a good day.